The gravel crunched under the tires of Karen Thompson's gleaming black SUV as it pulled into our driveway, and my stomach instantly twisted into a knot. Every time the HOA president visited, trouble inevitably followed. "Michael?" Karen called through her barely lowered window, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that didn't fool me for a second. "Those garden gnomes, they simply must go. They're in direct violation of Section 8, Paragraph 12 of our community guidelines." I slowly set down the watering can, my hands starting to tremble slightly. "They've been here for 7 years, Karen, ever since Dad passed." Karen's smile remained fixed, but it didn't reach her eyes, which were as cold and hard as flint. "Rules are rules, Michael. I've been lenient, but the board is insisting. Remove them by Friday, or it's a $200 fine per gnome." As her SUV reversed, kicking up more dust, I counted the garden gnomes, my heart sinking with each one. All 8 of them. Each one represented a cherished memory with Dad, a small token of happier times. That would be $1,600 in fines if I ignored her. Money we absolutely didn't have, not with Mum's medical bills relentlessly piling up. Mum appeared at the screen door, leaning heavily against the frame for support, her face pale and drawn. "Was that Karen again?" she asked, her voice weaker than usual. "Just HOA business," I lied, forcing a smile I didn't feel, not wanting to add to her worries. Mum had been experiencing dizzy spells lately, a terrifying new development, and the doctors were baffled as to the cause. By that night, I had carefully wrapped each gnome in newspaper, a lump forming in my throat with each one, and stored them in the garage. Dad had bought one every year on Mum's birthday, a tradition he'd cherished. Now, they sat in darkness, like pieces of our happiness were being slowly, methodically chipped away. The feeling of helplessness was suffocating. Friday arrived, and like clockwork, I spotted Karen making her rounds through the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, meticulously checking for violations. She paused at our garden, making a theatrical show of nodding in approval before writing something down. Something about that gesture felt deeply unsettling. By Monday, the situation escalated. We received another notice. Our mailbox was the wrong shade of blue. We were required to repaint it the approved midnight azure from the HOA color palette. "It's just a mailbox," I told Mum, trying to sound nonchalant as I repainted it, "not worth fighting over." But a gnawing unease had begun to settle in my gut. However, the minor infractions continued, piling up with alarming speed. The next week, it was our bird feeder, then our wind chimes, then the height of our hedges. Each time Karen visited, Mum seemed noticeably worse afterward. More tired, more confused, her skin taking on a slightly jaundiced hue. I started to wonder, with a growing sense of dread, if the constant stress was exacerbating her mysterious condition. One evening, as I was taking out the trash, I noticed Doug Thompson, Karen's husband, standing near our water meter at the very edge of our property. The instant he saw me, he quickly walked away, pretending to check his phone. "Everything okay?" I called out, my voice laced with suspicion. "Just walking the dog," he replied, though I didn't see any dog anywhere near him. I immediately mentioned it to our neighbor, Elaine Rodriguez, who lived directly across the street. "The Thompsons don't even have a dog," she whispered conspiratorially, leaning over her fence. "And between you and me, Karen's been targeting anyone who voted against her at the last HOA election. Your mum was the only one who spoke up about Karen's outrageous plan to double our dues." That night, Mum couldn't keep her dinner down. Her skin looked disturbingly yellow in the harsh bathroom light as she hunched over the toilet, her body racked with tremors. "I think we should go to the hospital," I said, my voice tight with fear, helping her to the car. The emergency room doctor ran a battery of tests, but found nothing conclusive. Could be a virus, he suggested vaguely, or possibly something environmental. Any changes at home recently? On the drive back, Mum dozed fitfully in the passenger seat. I deliberately took the long way, passing the Thompson house. Their lights were on, and I could see Karen and Doug in their kitchen window, laughing over glasses of wine. The sight of their carefree joy fueled a burning anger within me. The next morning, Mum couldn't even get out of bed. Her hands shook so violently she couldn't hold her coffee mug. I called Dr. Patel, who, thankfully, agreed to squeeze her in. While waiting for our appointment, I decided to meticulously walk our property line, searching for anything unusual, anything out of place, particularly near the water meter where I'd seen Doug. The ground near the meter looked disturbed. Kneeling down, I noticed something horrifying. Small droplets of a viscous blue liquid on some nearby rocks. At that very moment, my phone rang. It was the hospital. Mom had collapsed in Dr. Patel's office, the nurse explained, her voice urgent. We're running toxicology screens. The doctor suspects some type of poisoning. Poisoning. My mind instantly flashed to Doug by our water meter, the strange blue drops, the precise timing of Mom's symptoms worsening after Karen's visits. A cold, hard fury began to solidify in my chest. I rushed to the hardware store and bought a high-definition security camera. That night, I installed the camera in our old oak tree, pointing it directly at the water meter. If Doug came back, I'd have undeniable proof. Mum stayed in the hospital for 3 agonizing days. Her tests showed elevated levels of strange chemicals, but nothing the doctors could immediately identify. Whatever it is, it's causing significant liver and kidney stress, Dr. Patel explained gravely. Has she been exposed to any chemicals, pesticides, new cleaning products? When we finally got home, a bright orange notice was taped to our door. The HOA was fining us for unauthorized landscaping because I hadn't mowed the lawn while taking care of Mum in the hospital. As I crumpled the notice in my fist, my security camera alert pinged. Someone was at our water meter right now. I raced outside, adrenaline coursing through my veins, just in time to see Doug Thompson hurrying away. Karen waited in their SUV at the curb, the engine running, a smug look on her face. "What are you doing to our water?" I shouted, my voice raw with rage. Karen rolled down her window, her expression a mask of feigned innocence. "Michael, you're clearly under a lot of stress. Perhaps your mother's illness is affecting your judgment." They drove off before I could respond, leaving me shaking with fury and frustration. My hands trembled as I checked the security footage. There it was, clear as day. Doug pouring something from a small, unlabeled bottle into our water line. Karen keeping watch, both of them smiling. It was sickening. I grabbed a water sample from our kitchen tap and the footage from my camera. These people were poisoning my mother, and I was going to make them pay. The water testing lab looked surprisingly unimpressive from the outside, just another nondescript storefront in a strip mall. But the technician, Dave, took my sample and my story very seriously. "It'll take 48 hours for complete results," he warned, "but I can run a quick screen for common contaminants today." While waiting, I visited Mum in the hospital. Her skin was almost grey against the stark white sheets, dark circles hanging beneath her eyes like bruises. The sight of her so frail and weak fueled my determination. "The neighbors keep asking about you," I told her, trying to sound upbeat. "Elaine brought soup. Even Mr. Jenkins from 2 doors down sent flowers." Mum tried to smile, but it was weak and strained. "And Karen? Has she sent another violation notice while I've been away?" I squeezed her hand, my jaw tight. "Don't worry about Karen right now." My phone vibrated with a text from Dave. "Call me ASAP." I stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. "What did you find?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Ethylene glycol," Dave said grimly. "Antifreeze, low concentration, but definitely present. I've never seen it in residential water before. You should call the police immediately." I drove straight to the police station, armed with my water sample and the damning video footage. Officer Martinez took my report, but her expression remained skeptical. "The video shows someone at your water meter, but we can't clearly see what substance is being poured," she explained, "and trace amounts of chemicals can get into water systems in many ways." "My mother is in the hospital with organ damage," I protested, my voice rising in desperation. "The timing matches perfectly with when the Thompsons were at our meter." "We'll investigate," she promised, but her tone lacked conviction. I left feeling utterly defeated and frustrated. Back home, another HOA notice awaited, this one even more infuriating than the last. "Unauthorized security equipment must be removed within 24 hours. They knew about my camera, which meant they'd been watching our house. A chilling realization. The next day, I installed 3 more cameras, hidden ones this time. If the Thompsons returned, I'd catch them from multiple angles, leaving no room for doubt. At the hospital, Dr. Patel confirmed the findings from my water test. "Ethylene glycol poisoning matches your mother's symptoms. We've adjusted her treatment accordingly, but the damage to her kidneys may be permanent." Permanent. The word echoed in my head like a death knell as I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned bone white. A voicemail waited on my phone from Malcolm Reed, the HOA treasurer. "Michael, we need to discuss these allegations you're making. The board takes homeowner disputes very seriously, but accusing fellow residents of criminal activity without proof has consequences." I deleted the message, my blood simmering. Then I called my college roommate Jamie, who was now an environmental lawyer. "They're poisoning her, Jamie," slowly I explained, my voice choked with emotion. "Just enough to make her sick, not enough to kill her quickly. They want us gone because Mum opposed their fee increases." "This is serious, Michael," Jamie said, her voice grave. "If the police won't help, we need to get creative. Tell me everything about Pinecrest Gardens infrastructure." For the next 3 hours, we meticulously dug into property records, utility agreements, and the HOA charter. Jamie was a relentless researcher. Then she found something truly interesting. Unlike most neighborhoods, where water was provided by the city, Pinecrest Gardens water came from private wells, managed by a company called Clearwater LLC. "Look at this," Jamie said, sending me a link. "Clearwater filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy last month. They're restructuring debt and likely selling assets." "Why does that matter?" I asked, my mind starting to race. "Because whoever owns the water rights controls the water," Jamie explained. "The HOA has a long-term contract with Clearwater, but if someone else bought the company..." A daring, audacious plan began forming in my mind. How much would it cost to buy a failing water company? "More than most people have lying around," Jamie admitted, "but less than you might think in bankruptcy proceedings." I thought about Mum's deteriorating health, the mounting hospital bills, the smug, self-satisfied look on Karen's face. "I've got savings and my 401k, and the house has equity." "Michael, think very carefully," Jamie warned. "This is a huge move. It could be incredibly risky." But in my heart, I was not afraid and decided to be bold. The next morning, as I was leaving to visit Mom, Karen's SUV blocked my driveway. She rolled down her window, smiling that infuriating fake smile like we were old friends. "Michael, the board is concerned about your mother. If her health makes maintaining property standards difficult, Perhaps it's time to consider assisted living. I know a lovely facility in the next county, sir. My hands clenched into fists so tight I felt my nails digging into my palms. My mother isn't going anywhere. Well, Karen said, her voice hardening, the neighborhood has certain expectations. We've been patient, but the violations are piling up. The fines now total over $3,000. $3,000, I echoed, incredulous. I never received notices for most of these supposed violations. Karen waved a dismissively manicured hand. They were properly delivered, according to HOA protocol. If you can't pay, we'll have to place a lien on your property. That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that this wasn't random harassment. They were systematically trying to force us out, to steal our home. I'll handle the fines, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. And Karen, I'd be careful about drinking the water around here. I hear it's not safe. Her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, before she sped away. At the hospital, Mum had visitors, Elaine and 3 other neighbors, all of whom had also butted heads with Karen in the past. We don't believe the HOA stories about you and your mum, Elaine said firmly. Karen's been getting worse since she became president, more power-hungry. Has anyone else gotten sick? I asked carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. They exchanged uneasy glances. Not sick exactly, said Mr. Jenkins, but my dog died suddenly last month after Karen complained about his barking. The vet couldn't explain it. I showed them the water test results, but not the video. I didn't want to put them at risk. We're with you, Elaine promised. Just tell us how we can help. That evening, I called Jamie's contact at a bankruptcy law firm. After explaining in detail what I wanted to do, I emptied my savings account and applied for a home equity loan. The risk was enormous, but the thought of Mum suffering, of Karen getting away with her cruelty, spurred me on. The next day, Dr. Patel pulled me aside during my visit with Mum, his expression grave. Her kidneys are functioning at 40% capacity. She's going to need dialysis, possibly a transplant eventually. The weight of his words felt like a physical blow. I sat in the hospital parking lot staring at nothing, a cold, hard rage building inside me. My phone rang. It was Jamie. The initial offer has been submitted, she said, her voice cautiously optimistic. Now we wait. 2 days later, Malcolm Reed left another voicemail, his tone increasingly agitated. Michael, we've heard disturbing rumors about your intentions regarding Clearwater LLC. The board would like to meet with you immediately to discuss water access concerns. They were worried. Good. I deleted the message and checked my hidden cameras. No sign of the Thompsons near our water meter, but Doug's car had driven by our house 6 times yesterday. He was definitely keeping tabs on us. Then, a breakthrough. Jamie's contact called with news. Our offer for Clearwater LLC had been accepted. In 1 week, I would own the company that controlled the HOA's entire water supply. That night, as I sat by Mum's hospital bed, watching her sleep, her frail body connected to a multitude of machines, I made a silent promise. Karen Thompson thought she could poison my mother and get away with it. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. My blood pumped furiously in my ears. My determination hardened into something unbreakable. The lab results were in my hands, and I could barely read them through the red haze of my anger. The water sample from our house contained ethylene glycol, antifreeze, not enough to kill Mum quickly, but just enough to make her slowly, agonizingly sicker each day. I slammed my fist on the table, rattling my coffee cup. Who does this to an innocent woman? To anyone? I called Detective Rivera immediately. I have proof. The lab found antifreeze in our water, and I have video of Doug Thompson tampering with our water line. The detective sighed, her voice weary. I understand you're upset, Mr. Davis, but the video doesn't clearly show what substance he's adding, if anything. And finding chemicals in your water doesn't prove who put them there. Are you serious? I exploded, my voice cracking with disbelief and rage. They're poisoning my mother. We need direct evidence linking the Thompsons to the chemical, she repeated, her tone frustratingly measured. Keep the video safe, and we'll continue investigating. That afternoon, a bright red notice appeared on our door, the bold letters practically screaming, "Violation, unauthorized surveillance equipment. Must be removed within 48 hours or face a $500 fine." I laughed bitterly. Of course, Karen would try to get rid of the very cameras that caught her husband in the act. I took photos of the notice and called Mum's doctor to update him on the lab results. "We can adjust her treatment now that we know what we're dealing with," he said, his voice somber. "But Michael, she needs to stop being exposed immediately." "I'm trying everything," I whispered, watching Mum sleep in her hospital bed, tubes running from her arms, her face gaunt and pale. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced our living room until 3 a.m., relentlessly searching online for anything about HOA water systems. A forgotten memory surfaced. Dad once mentioned something about our neighborhood's unusual water setup. I dug through his old files in the basement until sunrise, sneezing from the dust, my eyes burning with exhaustion. And then I found it. In a folder labeled Home Purchase, documents showed that Pinecrest Gardens water didn't come directly from the city, but through a private company called Clearwater LLC. Curious, I researched Clearwater LLC all day, neglecting my work responsibilities entirely. Their website looked ancient, last updated in 2018. Public records showed they owned water rights to 3 neighborhoods, including ours. More importantly, a recent Business Journal article mentioned they were facing bankruptcy after their founder died. My college roommate, Jason, now worked as a water rights attorney in Colorado. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I dialed his number anyway, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Jason, it's Michael Davis. I have a weird legal question." After explaining everything, Jason went quiet for so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. "So you're saying this company that controls your HOA's water is going bankrupt?" he finally asked. "That's what it looks like," I confirmed. "And you want to know if you could buy it?" My heart raced at hearing my half-formed, desperate idea spoken aloud. "Could I?" I pressed. "Theoretically, yes," Jason said slowly. "Water rights are property. They can be bought and sold. But Michael, what exactly are you planning?" I glanced at Mum's empty chair, where she should be, doing her crossword puzzles, her laughter echoing in my memory. "Justice," I replied, my voice low and steady. "This could cost everything you have, Michael," Jason warned. "What's money compared to Mum's life?" I replied, my mind already racing with the dizzying, terrifying possibilities. That evening, I visited Mom in the hospital. Her skin looked alarmingly yellow under the harsh, fluorescent lights. "Any news on what's making me sick?" she asked weakly. I squeezed her hand, debating how much to tell her. Before I could answer, Karen Thompson walked in, carrying a ridiculously large bouquet of lilies. "Oh, I didn't know you'd be here," she said, with a display of fake surprise that made my stomach churn. "I've been so worried about your mother." Our eyes locked. Did she know that I knew? Was this visit a way to see how much damage she'd done? To gloat in her cruelty? "How thoughtful of you," I said coldly. "Mum needs rest now. You should go." Karen placed the flowers down with exaggerated care and touched Mum's foot through the blanket. "We're all praying for you, Margaret. The neighborhood just isn't the same without your smile." After she left, Mum looked confused. That was strange. She's never brought me flowers before. I gripped the bed rail so hard, my knuckles turned white. "Mom, I need to ask you something important. Do you trust me?" "With my life," she answered without hesitation. "I might need to do something drastic to make you safe. It might make some people angry." She smiled weakly. "Your father always said, sometimes you need to fight fire with fire." Her eyes drifted shut, the medication pulling her back under. As I left the hospital, my phone buzzed with an email from Jason. It contained contact information for Clearwater LLC's bankruptcy attorney. The subject line read, "Are you sure about this?" I wasn't sure about anything, except that Karen and her cronies deserved whatever was coming to them. I wondered, with a growing sense of unease, just how far they would go to protect their carefully constructed, picture-perfect neighborhood image. "You want to buy Clearwater LLC?" The bankruptcy attorney stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. "The company that owns 3 failing water systems, including the troubled, contentious water of Pinecrest Gardens?" I nodded firmly, my heart racing, but my voice steady. "That's exactly what I want." "But, Kashisha, why? The infrastructure needs significant upgrades. They're behind on their permits and—" "I have my reasons," I interrupted, cutting him off. "How much?" He named a price that made my mouth go dry. It would take every penny of my savings, my 401k with the hefty early withdrawal penalty, and I'd still need a substantial loan. But Mom's pale, drawn face flashed in my mind, and I knew I had no choice. "I'll need 2 weeks to get the money together," I said, already mentally calculating how to make it happen. Walking to my car, doubts flooded me. Was I completely insane? Could I really pull this off? My phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Mom's kidney function was getting worse. The doubts vanished, replaced by a renewed surge of cold, hard determination. The next morning, I applied for a home equity loan and initiated the withdrawal of my retirement funds. The bank manager raised his eyebrows, but thankfully asked no questions. I called work and requested unpaid leave for a family emergency, a vast understatement. While waiting for the loan approval, I visited the county records office and pulled every document related to Clearwater LLC. The clerk, a kind, gray-haired woman named Doris, helped me navigate the labyrinthine filing system. "Interesting company," she commented, her voice laced with a hint of local history. "They've held those water rights since 1983. Used to be well run, until old Mr. Jenkins died. Do you know if they have any special powers over the neighborhoods they serve?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Doris smiled knowingly. "Honey, the one who controls the water controls everything. That's been true since the beginning of time." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. The loan was approved faster than expected. I signed a mountain of paperwork, trying not to think about the massive debt I was taking on, the sheer audacity of my plan. Jason called to check on my mental state. "You're really doing this?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and concern. "You understand you'll be responsible for providing water to hundreds of homes?" "I only care about one home right now," I replied, my voice tight. "But don't worry, I'm not planning to leave anyone without water permanently, just strategically." "That doesn't sound reassuring," Jason muttered. 3 weeks of sleepless nights and endless paperwork later, I sat in a sterile conference room, signing the final documents. The bankruptcy attorney still looked thoroughly confused, but clearly pleased to finally close the troubled account. "Congratulations," he said, sliding a thick folder toward me. "You now own Clearwater LLC, including all assets, permits, and obligations. The staff password sheet for the digital systems is inside." Driving home, with the folder beside me, felt utterly surreal. I now controlled the water supply to the very people who had poisoned my mother. The sheer power of it made me dizzy. I stopped by the hospital first. Mum was sleeping, her face thin and drawn, her breathing shallow and labored. Dr. Patel met me in the hallway, his expression grim. We've removed the toxins from her system, but there's been significant damage to her kidneys and liver. She might recover partially with time, but some effects could be permanent. Rage, hot and consuming, boiled inside me. Permanent. She was perfectly healthy before this. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "The good news is, she's stable enough to come home next week. You'll need to monitor her very closely, though." A nurse approached with fresh sheets. "Such a sweet lady," she commented. "And that neighbor of yours comes by every day with flowers. Karen, is it? Says your mum is like family to her." Bile rose in my throat. Karen was coming here daily, playing the concerned neighbor, while her husband's poison did its insidious work. I thanked the nurse and sat with Mum until visiting hours ended. On my way out, I passed the gift shop and spotted Karen selecting another overly cheerful bouquet. I ducked behind a display, watching as she purchased lilies and asked the clerk for a card. Through the gift shop window, I could see her writing on the tiny card, her mouth curved in what might look like concern to others, but I recognized the smug satisfaction underneath. At home, I opened the Clearwater LLC folder and found the login information for their billing and water management system. The outdated software took forever to load, but eventually I had access to every water meter in Pinecrest Gardens, including flow rates, billing history, and, most importantly, remote shut-off controls. My phone rang just after midnight. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Michael. This is Malcolm Reed, from the HOA board." His voice sounded tense, almost panicked. "We've become aware that you've purchased Clearwater LLC." My heart skipped a beat. How did they find out so quickly? "News travels fast," I said calmly, trying to keep my voice steady. "The board would like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss this unusual situation." "I'm not interested in meeting," I replied, my grip tightening on the phone. "Be reasonable, Michael," Malcolm's voice hardened. "We all live here. This affects everyone in Pinecrest Gardens." "So does my mother," I said, my anger rising, threatening to spill over. "And she might not live here much longer thanks to your friends." "I don't know what you're implying, but tell Karen and the board they'll receive official notice tomorrow," I interrupted, cutting him off. I hung up before he could respond. I stayed up all night, meticulously learning the water system controls. By dawn, I had drafted an official notice to the HOA board. Effective immediately, water rates will increase by 400% for all Pinecrest Gardens residents. As the sun rose, I walked to our community mailbox and sent identical letters to each board member. Then, I drove to the small, dusty Clearwater LLC office, which I now owned, and changed the locks. Inside, dusty filing cabinets contained decades of records. In a file labeled Pinecrest Gardens, I found something particularly interesting, a contract clause allowing for emergency rate adjustments without prior approval due to extenuating circumstances. A slow smile spread across my face. My phone began ringing non-stop. First Malcolm again, then other board members, their voices ranging from pleading to outraged. I let them all go to voicemail. Only when Karen's name flashed on my screen did I answer. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Managing my business," I replied calmly, enjoying her fury. "This is illegal. You can't quadruple our water rates overnight." "Actually, I can," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "Section 7, paragraph 3 of the original contract. You might want to read it." There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then her voice, tight with barely controlled rage. "What do you want?" I smiled, a genuine smile, for the first time in weeks. "Let's talk about what you've been putting in my mother's water." Karen banged on my door at 7 a.m. the next morning, her face red with fury, her perfectly coiffed hair slightly disheveled. "You can't do this. It's extortion," she screamed, waving the outrageously inflated water bill in my face. I leaned against the door frame, surprisingly calm. "Is it? Kind of like slowly poisoning an elderly woman, isn't it?" "You have no proof," she hissed, glancing nervously at my security camera, her eyes narrowed. "I don't need proof anymore," I said, my voice low and steady. "I have something better. I have control." The phone calls continued relentlessly throughout the day. Malcolm, the treasurer, called 6 times, his voice increasingly desperate. Board members I'd never even spoken to suddenly wanted to chat. I let most go to voicemail, but finally picked up when Malcolm called from a different number. "This is unacceptable," he sputtered. "People can't afford these rates." "I have terms," I said simply. First, a public admission of what Karen and Doug did to my mom. Second, they leave Pinecrest Gardens forever. Third, you create a fund for Mum's medical bills. They're over $200,000 now. "That's outrageous. We can't admit to something with no proof." "Then I guess I'll shut off water service to the entire neighborhood, except for my house, tomorrow," I said calmly. "I checked with 3 lawyers. It's completely legal." I hung up, my heart pounding, but my resolve unwavering. 20 minutes later, Karen texted everyone in the HOA directory about an emergency meeting that night at the community center. The message called me a neighborhood terrorist who was holding our water hostage. I had no intention of going, but my neighbor, Ted, knocked on my door at 6:30 p.m. "You should come," he said quietly. "Karen's telling everyone you're making up stories about her poisoning your mum because you're angry about gnome violations." The community center was buzzing with angry, confused voices when I walked in. The room went silent the instant I entered. Karen stood at the front, pointer in hand, displaying a slide that read, "Water Terrorist," with my picture underneath. "Here he is now," she announced dramatically, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The man who thinks he can bankrupt us all over some silly garden decoration rules." I walked straight to the front. "May I?" I asked, holding out my hand for the microphone. Karen clutched it tighter, but Malcolm, looking increasingly nervous, nodded at her to hand it over. "I bought Clearwater LLC for one reason," I said, my voice shaking slightly but filled with a righteous anger that resonated through the room. "My mother has been in the hospital for weeks. 3 separate labs found antifreeze in our water line. I have video of Doug Thompson tampering with our water supply while Karen kept watch." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a wave of shock and disbelief. Karen lunged for the microphone. "Lies, all lies. He has no proof. He's just angry because we enforce the rules everyone else follows. Why would I spend my life savings to buy a water company over garden gnomes?" I asked the crowd, my voice rising in volume. "Think about it." Doug stood up, his face flushed. "This is defamation. We'll sue you." An older woman in the back raised her hand, her voice trembling. "My dog got sick last month." The older woman continued, her voice gaining strength. "After Karen complained about my holiday decorations, the vet found something strange in his blood, but couldn't identify it." Other neighbors began to stand, their voices joining the growing chorus of suspicion and outrage. "My kids had stomach problems for weeks after we argued about fence height," one woman said. "We changed to bottled water, and they got better." Another chimed in, "I've been feeling unusually tired and dizzy lately, and I couldn't figure out why." Karen's face went pale, her carefully constructed facade of control crumbling before my eyes. "This is ridiculous. You're all being manipulated," she shrieked, her voice desperate. As the meeting dissolved into utter chaos, with people shouting questions and accusations, I slipped out, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and vindication. When I got home, I found my mailbox smashed and the word liar spray-painted in large, angry letters across my garage door. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. In my inbox was a message with no text, just a video attachment. It showed Karen and Doug arguing in their garage, their voices clearly audible. "They can't prove anything," Doug was saying, pouring liquid from a container clearly labeled antifreeze into a smaller bottle. "Just a few drops in the right places and problem neighbors solve themselves." I immediately forwarded the email to everyone in the HOA directory, to the police, and to several local news outlets. By noon, police cars lined our street, their lights flashing as they led Karen and Doug away in handcuffs. I stood watching from my window, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. I wondered who had sent me the video and why they'd waited until now to share it. Had it been another neighbor, too afraid to speak up before? My phone rang. It was the hospital. Mom's kidneys were failing. I rushed to the hospital, weaving through traffic, my heart pounding in my chest, running red lights in my desperation. Mum lay hooked to machines, her breathing shallow and ragged. "We need to start dialysis immediately," Dr. Patel explained, his voice grave. "The damage to her kidneys is severe." My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. News vans parked at the neighborhood entrance. The police called twice, asking for copies of my water test results and security footage. We found 6 bottles of antifreeze in the Thompsons' garage. Detective Rodriguez told me later that day, one had a modified cap with a small tube attachment. Lab tests show it matches the chemical signature in your water samples. When I finally returned home that night, exhausted and emotionally drained, I found 30 neighbors standing on my lawn, holding candles, their faces filled with a mixture of relief and shame. Ted stepped forward, handing me an envelope. "We took up a collection for your mom's medical bills," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's not enough, but it's a start." Inside was $14,750 in checks and cash. "We didn't know," whispered Mrs. Gonzalez, who lived 3 doors down, tears streaming down her face. "Karen told everyone your mum was making up her illness for attention." The story exploded across the local news. HOA horror. Couple poison neighbor's water over garden gnomes, ran the headline. 3 more families came forward with suspicious illnesses following disputes with Karen. Malcolm called me from a new number, his voice shaking so badly I could barely understand him. "I swear, I didn't know what they were doing. Please, you have to believe me." "Did you help cover it up?" I asked, my voice cold and hard. His silence was all the answer I needed. The preliminary hearing was standing room only. Karen and Doug pleaded not guilty, their lawyer arguing the video was doctored and calling me a vengeful homeowner with a vendetta. Their bail was set at $500,000 each. Malcolm and 2 other board members resigned after text messages surfaced, showing they had discussed my mother's suspicious illness months ago and had actively dismissed concerns from other residents. The HOA office was flooded with angry calls demanding all board members step down. I received a letter from the district attorney asking if I'd accept a plea deal where Karen and Doug would serve 5 years instead of the possible 20. "No," I replied without hesitation. "They tried to kill my mother, slowly and painfully. They deserve the maximum." Ted and 5 other neighbors formed a new interim HOA board. Their first act was to suspend all fines and violations, pending a complete review of the bylaws. The water company became a hot topic. Lawyers for the HOA argued I'd purchased it illegally, but my paperwork was solid. I announced new rates, normal rates for most residents, but a special premium for properties owned by anyone who had served on Karen's board. This is simply a business decision, I explained to reporters, my voice devoid of emotion. I calculate risk differently for those who supported poisoners. 4 former board members put their houses up for sale the next day. No one bought them. Meanwhile, Mum began to improve. The dialysis worked, though doctors warned she might still need a kidney transplant eventually. I spent days researching treatments, nights sleeping in her hospital room in an uncomfortable chair. On day 17, I woke to find her watching me, her eyes surprisingly clear. "You look terrible," she whispered, smiling weakly. "You should see the other guys," I joked, tears spilling down my cheeks, a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The following week, police discovered a journal in Karen's bedside table, detailing every troublemaker she'd targeted over 3 years, 15 families, 3 pets that had died mysteriously, 1 elderly man who had moved to assisted living after unexplained health problems. The prosecutor added 14 more counts to the charges. Mum came home 63 days after her collapse. The neighbors lined the street, clapping and cheering as our car pulled up. Ted and his wife had cleaned our house, filled the fridge, and put the garden gnomes back in place, now joined by 20 new ones contributed by neighbors. "We thought you might want to rebuild your collection," Ted explained, his eyes twinkling. The following Sunday, the new HOA board president, Elaine Rodriguez, who, it turned out, had despised Karen for years, knocked on our door with an official document. "The board voted unanimously to exempt your property from all HOA regulations permanently," she said, handing me the notarized papers. "And we'd like to name the community garden after your mum, if that's okay." Mum cried when I told her, tears of joy and relief. 2 months later, Karen and Doug accepted a plea deal for 12 years each, plus restitution. During the impact statements, Mum spoke directly to them, her voice surprisingly strong. "I forgive you," she said simply, "but I'll never forget." I transferred ownership of Clearwater LLC to a community trust run by Ted, Elaine, and 3 other neighbors. The proceeds now fund medical expenses for all of Karen's victims. Yesterday, we held the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Helen Morrison Healing Garden at the community center. Every family brought a garden gnome to place along the pathway. I still keep the security cameras running, though. Some lessons you only need to learn once. This story highlights the importance of vigilance, community, and standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. It shows how seemingly minor disputes can escalate, and how crucial it is to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. It also underscores the power of collective action and the resilience of the human spirit. What are your thoughts on this story? Have you ever experienced a similar situation with an HOA or a neighbor? Share your experiences and thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more compelling stories and discussions.